The hardest skill to master as a DM, that even the pros don't always get right, is pacing. And I'm certainly not claiming to have mastered it, but by changing the way I prep and some adjustments to the way I run the game, I've gotten a lot better. Welcome to the table. I'm Kelly, and here are some tips for improving your pacing. There are two types of pacing that you need to consider. There's session pacing and what I'll call campaign pacing. Session pacing is the flow of your session, how quickly you move from one encounter to the next, and just generally if your sessions feel like they drag on. Then there's campaign pacing, which is how fast the overall plot gets advanced and how quickly you move through the story of your campaign. Campaign pacing is just as important as session pacing. If you're planning a bunch of little encounters that don't seem to serve any purpose or advance the plot, then your players can start to feel unsure of where they're supposed to go and what they're supposed to do. When I prep a campaign, and then when I'm running it, I like to visualize the plot as a line graph, where the dots are the key events that I want to happen in my story that I need to connect as we move through the campaign. As I'm prepping a session, I look at the next event and list out exactly what the party needs to know to get them there. Then I write out 2 or 3 story goals for the session and keep them behind my screen. For example, if the next main event in my plot is a confrontation with one of the BBEG's lieutenants, then my goals for the next couple of sessions would be the following. 1. Give them a reason to search for this person. 2. Tell them the lieutenant's name. And 3. Tell them where to find the lieutenant. With these goals in mind, I can start to build encounters that will give the party each of these pieces of information. What these encounters are will depend on the campaign and what the party is interested in doing. It might be that the lieutenant's henchmen destroy an establishment that they are familiar with, so an NPC asks them to investigate. Or maybe they need an illegal item and this lieutenant is the only person who can supply it. I find that clearly defining the goals of my session in terms of what the party needs to know by the end of it really helps me ensure that the party understands the plot and that they are always gaining knowledge and moving the plot forward. For session pace, there are things you can do in prep and things you can do while running the game. The main thing in prep is to figure out how much you should be trying to fit into a session in the first place. I know that my group likes to play roughly 3-hour sessions in person. If we're playing online, then I found everyone's attention span is a little less, so 2-hour sessions work better. At the pace that my group plays at, I know that I can usually plan 3 encounters per session. And by encounters, I mean anything that the party encounters. It could be an interaction with an NPC, some shopping, a combat encounter, or exploring a small building. This will vary for your group, but having a rough idea of how many encounters you can comfortably play through is really helpful. Then you can just design that number of encounters, ensuring that they achieve the goals you laid out, and you should have a very well-paced session. Now that you have all that prep out of the way, there are lots of little things you can do while you're running the game to keep things moving along. The first has to do with roleplay and dialogue. I love to roleplay and come up with fun NPCs to talk to my players with, but sometimes I get carried away and I get stuck in a very long roleplay conversation where not a ton happens in the end. If you feel like a dialogue scene is starting to drag on, then don't be afraid to move between describing what the person says and actual dialogue. For example, if your player asks the shopkeeper how long they've owned the shop, "Well, I've worked here pretty much my whole life, since I was just a boy." And he tells you in great detail exactly the changes that the store has undergone over the years and about the learning curve after taking over the shop when his mother passed away. Using a mixture of dialogue and description makes your character feel alive, but you don't need to sit there for 15 minutes IRL and improvise the person's history. The next pacing tip is don't be afraid to move your players along with questions or narration. If your players are having a meaningful scene with each other or an NPC, then sure, let it play out. But if they're just messing around and it's starting to drag on, you can always throw in an anyways and narrate them out of wherever they are. For some more session pacing tips, including tips on going through building exploration faster and ending combats that are dragging on, you can check out this video here about running a one-shot in one session. I appreciate you.